This is Old Line Farmer Radio, a Maryland Farm Bureau production, helping you achieve your best farm future.
Old Line Farmer Radio last night at 11:59 p.m. was Sine Die, the last day of the legislative session, and Tyler was there the entire time, and he is here bright and early this morning. I know he didn't want to do this, but he's here to tell us everything about what happened this legislative session.
Glad to be here. Second cup of coffee today. It's needed already.
Yeah. And Parker, you're here because you love
Because I'm here.
Yeah. Awesome. So Tyler, when you take a look just at this whole General Assembly session as a whole, there were, I think you said 3,000 bills?
Yep, over 3,000 bills introduced this year. Maryland Farm Bureau tracked over 250 of them, and we ended up testifying on 88 bills. So it was a busy session. Had some days that I was running from committee room to committee room, but it was good nonetheless, and I think it turned out to be a pretty good session for Maryland Farm Bureau after all.
Awesome, and I know the biggest discussions here were about the budget and energy. Specifically with the budget, we had a $3 billion deficit. We could talk all day about how we got there, but those are the cards, so we had to play within those parameters. There were a lot of things, we covered it in a past episode, there were a lot of cuts made to key ag programs. We had a huge grassroots response. Kind of tell our listeners about the progress that we made with those key ag programs.
Yeah, so we had a pretty frightening recommendation from the Department of Legislative Services about halfway through session that would cut all the funding to program open space for the next 4 years, as well as some funding to the Atlantic and Coastal Bay Trust Fund, which pays for things such as cover crop and manure transport, as well as some soil conservation and nutrient management positions. Grassroots outreach and coalition work was amazing. I know Parker can talk to this a little bit about how good the coalitions work together, but over 2,000 members or 2,000 responses from members of the Maryland Farm Bureau to legislators, which was a huge piece in getting that reversed and the legislators not agreeing and concurring with that DLS recommendation. Ag programs took a haircut, but everybody had to take a haircut this year with the $3.1 billion budget deficit. But in the end, the Maryland Ag Land Preservation Foundation, also known as MALF, is going to still have $11 to $12 million between them and rural legacy to be able to function with the program this year. It is a $25 million cut, but the program is still going to be functional this year, and we're not going to lose the program and not have zero funding, which is a huge key win. The Atlantic and Coastal Bay Trust Fund only took a $10 million hit, which I say only $10 million when you still have $67 million in the bank there. That's still going to allow for essential programs for not only agriculture but bay health, such as manure transport and cover crop, and continuing to work together towards the bay goals while providing opportunities for those in agriculture to do their part is going to be huge. And that program gets to stay put with that $67 million and still be very functionable and very rewarding for those that take advantage of it.
And, you mentioned it, kind of this coalition building that we had specifically for these budget programs. In some ways, we kind of had some strange bedfellows, but Parker, I guess, can you talk a little bit about that, because we were having calls every couple of days with so many stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, this is my 11th session really being involved, so it was by far the most work we've had to do as far as the budget goes. This year really came into play on, I think one call there was almost 100 folks from different organizations, the land preservation, ag stakeholder groups, to work together and get the message out to restore funding. And, everyone, I think we saw this year especially how important it is and how effective it can be when everyone's lining up with the same messaging and contacting legislators on the same message.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, we were constantly telling our members to reach out to their legislators from our Action Center, specifically on the budget. So I think that was a key grassroots victory, because there were people reaching out to the legislators saying, hey, these programs matter to us. I know towards the end of session, kind of this weekend, the big debate was about solar. Can you tell us a little bit about the progress that was made there?
Yeah, so there was a 3-bill energy package proposed this year by leadership. So from the start, we knew there were some sort of legs to all 3 of those bills. The one that ended up mattering the most to the members of the Maryland Farm Bureau was the solar bill. So that was SB 931, HB 1036, and it had a hearing in third week of February, fourth week of February, in that general time frame, and then moved a little bit slower from there on out. There were a lot of discussions from the standpoint of trying to protect ag in as many ways as possible, and it really heated up the last few days. The last really week of session was a lot of engagement, not only between our members, but also from my standpoint, other coalition stakeholders and those that were advocating on behalf of the agriculture community down there. And ultimately, in the end, the bill ended up passing yesterday and went through. There were some pieces that were built in for protection from MACO amendments, some things that will preserve some topsoil and limit the grading and try to keep all the topsoil there as possible, because the proponents say that those solar sites can go back to agriculture at once point. Well, if that topsoil is not there, there's no chance. So that at least gives it a little more of an opportunity down the road. We also were working really hard to build in a protection for priority preservation areas. And we were advocating for 2% of those acres to put a cap on within the counties, that once it hit 2% of that acreage within the county, it would go back to the local zoning authority rather than the state overall siting standards and siting mandate and preemption. Ultimately, 5% is what got it built into the bill, which in the end, 5% is a lot closer to 2% in what agriculture wanted versus where the solar utilities came in wanting 100%. So we ended up being 3% off, they were 95% off, and that adds some sort of protection to some of our ag land, especially that ag land that falls in the priority preservation areas. And ultimately, the big thing I want to highlight with the bill is it doesn't force anybody to put their land into solar. It still has to be negotiated, still has to be purchased or leased. This isn't by any means saying, hey, this land is going to be forced to go into solar. It does make it a little bit easier for those that want to go down that road, but there is no mandate that says, hey, we're coming in and taking your land.
And then I think, Parker, some people may look at this and they say, well, 5% is still too much. Look, I think we all would have preferred the 2%.
Yeah, and I think a true testament to everyone in the ag community who reached out to their legislators. I mean, when you listen to them debate in committee and have conversation, there really is a lot of goodwill that they have and they want to have for the farming community. And, when you listen to them speak about the compromise of 5%, it really was about protection at the end of the day. And so, there is some reassurance there when you hear them talk about, protecting that 95%. But, we definitely still have concerns about the number of acres that 5% does capture. But, I think ultimately, it is reassuring to hear them speak about agriculture in a way that they want to protect Maryland's #1 commercial industry. We have some disagreements on how strong to protect it. But, I think there is a lot to be said for that conversation and how we were able to get across to them, to get that number to 5.
Yeah, and I think specifically with this local zoning portion, now more than ever, it's important that we take that message to our local officials as well. Get involved on the county level. Obviously, we're doing our work here on the state level, keep involved in that, but again, if we don't make our voices heard, who's going to do it for us? With that being said, we did have some pretty big wins. When we had you on the first episode of Old Line Farmer, you said that one of the biggest priority bills was this PFAS bill, which would basically take tools out of the toolbox for farmers, a very heavy-handed mandate. Tell us what happened with that.
Yeah, so the PFAS and pesticide bill was back for a second time this year, and that was definitely one of our priority bills and one of the things we were focusing on. It was heard in the House first. It was heard in the Health and Government Operations Committee, which Chairwoman Pena Melnick, it calls them the Committee of Compromise. So there was some sort of compromise there, some alterations to the definition, to the implementation date that really made the bill better for agriculture. It ultimately took the active ingredients impacted from roughly 80 down to about 8, and those active ingredients were not commonly used in agriculture practices. When the bill ended up crossing over to the Senate, it did not move in the Senate. So ultimately the bill ended up dying and not going anywhere and not passing, which in the end is still a victory for us, because that bill, our number one goal was to try and effectively stop that bill best we can. When the amendments were put in, it was one of those cases where we were comfortable with the bill passing as amended, so we got in a win-win situation, and ultimately the bill didn't go anywhere, which is probably the best thing for our members at this point.
Yeah, awesome. And then, I don't want to use the term kind of like smaller victories, but, there were a handful of bills that also passed that, albeit they're not, fundamentally changing the, nature of agriculture, but they matter to our members. The exceptional hauling, porta potty bill, as you were talking about earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about these small victories that we receive for our farmers?
Absolutely, and we still were able to get some bills across the finish line and get some bills that we were supported passed, which is a great thing. The exceptional hauling bill, which was HB 225, SB 203, that was one that was a true priority of the Delmarva Chicken Association this year, and it expands the exceptional hauling permit and the weight limits on those. So especially those that are hauling across state lines, which we do a lot in this state, especially on the Delmarva Peninsula. It adds some more uniformity for those that are traveling across state lines, adds some convenience there. Another one, the porta potty bill, as we affectionately call it, works with adding a commercial lavatory allowance for those that are in agritourism operations. There's a big debate right now and concern and trying to get these agritourism agritourism locations working that especially want to venture into the food side or have acceptable facilities for their guests. There was some concern, especially with pressurized water and that allowance there down to the health department level. This bill comes in and sets some clear standards and guidelines to what's allowed and adds an opportunity for facilities such as your commercialized bathrooms that can come in, your trailer bathrooms, to be deemed acceptable rather than having to go through that full expensive cost to put in a well system and a septic system, especially if the facility isn't running full year round. So it's a huge win for the agritourism operations, I think, in a conversation that's been going on for the past 3 years, but it was really nice to see it get across the finish line this year.
Yeah, and it's just kind of funny you mentioned that, because it kind of gets into the minutia, and it's funny, and when you're talking about the porta potty bill, but to your point, this is about help supporting our farm businesses. If you have a pole barn, that becomes an agritourism operation, and you have to shell out all this money to install bathrooms, that's hurting your bottom line, and in many cases, very unnecessary. So all of this work that we do is, that's a victory for farmers and kind of fighting back against some heavy-handed mandates. Parker, to that point, as we look overall at the general session, Tyler was there, you were there, we had our grassroots members, we had our board members down there every single day. How do you view session overall?
I think this session was probably one of the more challenging sessions that I can recall, and I think that there's, a dynamic that Annapolis and just down the street in DC and the priorities of the administration, trying to find that balance, at the federal level, and then how you couple that with state regulations, state laws. But I think there's a lot of energy was a huge issue, and I don't know that there really is a clear solution to some of these problems. And, we have 90 days to try to find a solution, and that's where it comes down to compromise, and you try to get the best that you can get in 90 days. But yeah, I think most people will say that they found that this session was just a little bit more challenging, more so than some past sessions. But I wasn't there every day, so I don't know. Maybe Tyler has a different opinion, but.
No, I definitely echo what Parker was saying. A challenging session for sure, and each different issue had its own kind of minutia and struggle and different intricate pieces to it in the conversation. It's definitely an energy and budget session, and when you combine those two things together, it's going to be challenging, especially when agriculture seems to be kind of on the tipping end of all of those for whatever reason. Sometimes it's the first place they look to cut, and as we know with energy, it's one of the first places they look to cite. So it certainly was challenging from that aspect, and working through that and finding or trying to compromise to the best solutions for our members was difficult at times, but in the end, I think it came out as a successful session. We ended up to avoid some major concerning aspects that were proposed at one point. The solar bill is a challenge and not something that we wanted to see go through, but there is some sort of protection there that is better than how the bill was originally proposed. It didn't have the topsoil requirements, it didn't have the PPA or cap in there. So challenging nonetheless, but I think it shows the power of the grassroots organization for a lot of stuff that was able to get done, the power of an agriculture coalition working together in one marching force and messaging the same way. We're 2% of the population, but it did not seem that way down there at session, and there was definitely a lot of conversation and a lot of focus, and the legislators were hearing not only what we were saying, but what the members were saying.
Mm-hmm. 2% of the population, but the largest commercial industry, and so we hit on that all the time. Parker, can you speak a little bit about our grassroots members stepping up and making their voices heard? If they hadn't done that, it could have been a lot worse for us.
Yeah, that's one great thing about the federated structure and having touch points in all 23 counties is that we can get our message out and have members respond from every corner of the state to their elected officials, and our members did that. They rose to the occasion, and like you said, I think we had an unprecedented amount of responses this year. So, I think that this hats off to everyone's efforts, but I really commend our membership responding to those calls to action when we needed them.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned earlier, it's just 90 days. A lot was packed into this. Going forward, what does the rest of the 8-9 months of the year look like? What should our members be telling to their elected officials? We have banquets coming up. We have summer picnics. We want to keep that open line of communication with our officials. What should we be talking about?
I think everything's on the table to talk about. I think you see every year in session, something that gets passed in 2025 maybe comes back and, it's a bill to fix something or fine tune or found that something didn't work quite right. So that is one of the beauties of meeting every year. I don't know that some people say that's always, the most efficient way to get stuff done. But yeah, I would say there's still going to be a lot of conversation around energy. I imagine budget. There's already, I think they're talking about having to meet again and look at the budget. But yeah, I would say a lot of the same issues we messaged on continue to, the big thing is continue to let your elected officials know what real impacts that has. I think we talked a lot of broad strokes in Annapolis, and those numbers are kind of easy to make decisions on, but how it impacts you on your farm at the farm level is really the best story that can be told.
Yeah, and so overall, you have some wins, you have some losses. That's going to be every single legislative session, but it's very helpful to have a person like Tyler, our grassroots members, Parker, down there advocating for our farmers. Sometimes, yeah. But it's to the point that our farmers want to be farming. They don't want to be in Annapolis having to have these debates, and so that's the power of an organization like Farm Bureau. Tyler, you might be the busiest man in the Maryland agriculture at the moment. I would say, go home, take a nap. You did good this session, but you're going to Washington, D.C. What are you doing there?
Going down to Washington, D.C., part of the current Lead Maryland class, Class 13. Give a shout out to my class there. And we actually leave today to go down to D.C. for 4 days as part of our next seminar. So I'll have a chance to engage with some federal legislators while I'm down there, have a meeting set up with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association as well. So it never ends going on and continuing to echo the message from the Maryland Farm Bureau members out to the federal legislators as well.
Very important too, especially with some of the things we're seeing out of Washington. Tyler, Parker, thank you so much for joining us. Any parting words?
Nothing from my end. Thank you to the members for everything that you guys did. The grassroots organization makes my job a lot easier, and the respect that the organization has certainly comes from the members and the county level engagement. I get to see it at the state level, but it comes from that true member engagement and the respect that the legislators have for our members that are in the field doing it every day.
The only last parting message I have is if there's anything that didn't go your way this session, there's always an opportunity for you to join Maryland Farm Bureau in our policy development process, which kicks off this summer. So, we'll be having these same conversations about finding solutions to a lot of these problems. So we need to start having those conversations sooner rather than later. So join today and be a part of the conversation.
That's so important. All it takes is one person making their voice heard, and that's so important. Parker, Tyler, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jim.